Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com, and you'll find my 6 podcasts: the Podfather, helping people become podcasters; the Awakening, exposing fraud and corruption but with solutions; the Crypto, all things blockchain technology; meditation podcast; speaking podcast; and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. My guest, a multi-award-winning ceramics artist based in Asheville, North Carolina, USA. I might have not done justice with the name there. She's overcame a painful scoliosis, spinal fusion, and she is the author of the just-released book, God the Artist, Revealing God's Creative Side Through Pottery. Please welcome Morgan Mc Carver.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. So, first of all, congratulations. And actually, I didn't even hold up the book, so I have the book. And one thing, you're obviously creative with the pottery, but I have a lovely kind of thank you card in it. But your writing is beautiful, which you rarely see these days. You've actually lovely writing, joint writing. It's nice to see because we don't get many notes these days.
Thank you. Yes, I try to keep letter writing alive, but I know it's kind of on its way out with technology and everything, which I don't know. I feel like that's a lost art in and of itself too.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, obviously I'm going to touch on the book, but I want to kind of go back, and because I know the scoliosis was a difficult time, but like prior to that, before the operation and everything, you might just kind of tell us the story.
Of course. So I have always grown up looking for a creative outlet. My grandmother used to watch me when both of my parents worked when I was young, before I was able to be old enough to go to school. And so she would make homemade Play-Doh on the stove with flour and water, and we would use food coloring. And so that's how I say I got my earliest start with kind of like a clay type medium. But then from then on, I really loved dancing competitively. And that was really my passion. I was at the top of my game. I had just made it to the regional competition, and then I had to have that scoliosis surgery. And so at the time, I wasn't able to dance anymore because it's a year-long recovery process. And so I felt like my creative medium was really taken away from me. And we can go into the surgery later, but basically, it's a spinal fusion surgery to correct scoliosis. So that's really what led me into pottery and how I found my love for ceramics.
And what age were you when you had to get the operation?
I was 14. I had been diagnosed with scoliosis about 3 years prior, and I had been wearing different back bracing techniques to try to correct my spine, or at least hold it in place. But it wasn't doing its job. So they were trying to hold my spine as long as they could to see if, when I had passed that final growth spurt, if my back would just kind of stop moving. And that wasn't really the case. So after I hit that growth spurt and kind of completed growing, they decided that, sooner rather than later, I should have the surgery.
And what's the actual, for those that don't know, is it a curvature of the spine, or what's of scoliosis? What exactly is it for?
Of course, it is. Basically, when my spine was growing, instead of growing straight up like it should, it was growing from side to side. And there's different versions of scoliosis, but mine was essentially an S curve, but I had 3 different curves. So I had a curve in my neck, a curve in my upper back, and a curve in my lower back. And all 3 of those were varying by degrees. So similar to how in geometry, where you measure the angle and see what degree that angle is, that's what I would go in for. I would have routine type x-rays, and they would check and see if my curves were getting more and more significant, and they were. And not only that, but my spine was also rotating at the time. So if I had left it untreated, my lung capacity was starting to be affected. I wasn't able to get 100% full breaths of air when I was breathing. So my organs were starting to be affected, and that only would have gotten worse the longer I would have left it.
And were you suffering pain as well in the back?
That's the weird thing. Honestly, I wasn't. And so that's one of the reasons why the surgery was really hard for me at 14 years old when I'm so athletic. I wasn't in pain. You could see my shoulders were uneven, and like my hip bones were uneven. So it was starting to affect things like one of my legs was a little bit longer than the other because of the way my spine was curving. But honestly, most of the pain came in the year-long recovery process because that involved 2 titanium rods and about 18 screws, forcing my spine straight. So all of those organs that had kind of been shifted now got rearranged and put back to the straight position. So the muscles in my legs, the leg that had been shorter, I had to kind of work on that. Learning to walk again, learning to sit up again. There were so many different things that all of these muscles have just been rearranged in my organs, and my muscles in my back had been cut through, obviously, for surgery. So just there was a lot of healing and a lot of pain to overcome during that year of surgery, or a year of recovery after the surgery.
And at that age, there must be a danger as well when they're touching the spine, like that if something goes wrong. It must have been, did you have that fear as well, or did you just kind of have full trust in the doctors that were doing the surgery?
No, I was definitely afraid. They assured me that, for the most part, it was a routine, relatively safe surgery. But of course, you're messing with your spinal column and spinal cord, all of these things, your nervous system. I was, of course, afraid that something could go wrong, or I could end up paralyzed, or something could happen. Thankfully, the surgery went really well. They did have to fuse more of my lower spine than they thought. So pretty much my entire back is fused together. I have a couple vertebrae at the bottom and a couple at the top that were not fused. But essentially, my entire spine is fused solid into one straight bone, so to speak, and that'll just be how it is for the rest of my life.
And because you mentioned you were 14, and I believe women grow till they're 17. What happened with, did that stop you from growing then, or did you grow, and how did that kind of react with the metals that were in your spine?
Basically, I had stopped growing at that point. I was very tall for my age. I had kind of hit all my growth spurts early. And basically, the doctors, that's what they were looking for too, as I was going in, to see, you can kind of tell on your growth plates, so to speak, when the doctors are looking at x-rays, they can kind of see how much more I was going to grow. And so they held off as long as they could. And I had pretty much grown as much as I was going to. But the interesting thing is, when I had the surgery, since my spine had been so curved, when they straightened it out, I was actually 1.5 inches taller because it was lengthening my spine. So I did grow actually after the surgery because of it. But thankfully, no, I didn't have any after effects in that way.
And was there much pain for the year that you were recovering?
There was, especially the nerves in my upper back. It just felt like when your hand or your foot falls asleep, just kind of that tingly, numb feeling. So that was a lot to deal with. There was a lot of pain during that time. I pretty much did school from home for about a month. And when I went back to school, I had to carry a pillow around and lean back against that. And there were a lot of accommodations that had to be made just because everything was so tender and trying to heal. And essentially, the doctors gave me that year-long recovery process because they wanted everything to fuse. They didn't want me to do something that could damage the spine, because the idea was that the bone was supposed to be fusing to the metal. The metal wasn't the only thing that's going to be holding my spine straight. So all of these things, I'm just pretty much waiting out the year to be able to move again, to do the things I love again. And then when I went back to dance after that year, of course, it was never the same because I was physically different, mentally different. So there were definitely some things I lost along the way.
So, I believe it was during the recovery then that you kind of got into the pottery.
Exactly. That summer, I had the surgery in January. So then that summer, I was out of school. I didn't have a friend group to see every day, and I couldn't go to dance classes. So my mom just signed me up for a pottery camp. It was a week-long kids camp. And I really had such a connection with the clay, just that personal relationship of me working directly with my hands, touching the clay directly, and just finding the flexibility in the clay that I couldn't get out of my physical body during that time. It was just such a freeing experience. And I really just kept signing up for more and more classes. And then that propelled me to get a degree in ceramics and start my business after that.
obviously I've read about that and I've seen, but I didn't know that there was degrees in that. I always thought kind of trades like that were just kind of passed on, like, masonry and stuff. You go in and someone's teaching you. So, like, how long was the course? And
Yeah, it was a Bachelor's of Arts program actually from Anderson University in Anderson, South Carolina. And I had a concentration in ceramics. It's a 4-year long program. But you're right, that is kind of dying out. Mostly you can get an art degree, but they're taking away those specializations nowadays. So thankfully, I was able to find a school that still offered that, and it's the South Carolina School of the Arts. So it was one of the few in that state that actually allowed me to major in ceramics. But it was a 4-year program, but you're right, it's not that common. Even today, people will still say, like, you did what? You studied what? So it's one of those things. It was a small program, but it was great.
And like, as for those listening, we're going to have the links for all the stuff that you've done, but like, you have incredible work, because I've looked at your Instagram, you have a Etsy page, and the Facebook and everything. Like, I mean, it's not, because sometimes people think pottery, they think just the kind of like the Ghost movie, just a straightforward mug or something. But you have some beautiful stuff, and then lovely designs on it and everything. So I suppose, kind of, is a lot of that stuff taught to you, or is it your own creativity just building as you kind of develop after even the university?
My work now, my body of work actually developed after I graduated. I was kind of playing around with the ideas of some of the things, techniques that I was experiencing in college. For instance, I learned how to slip cast in college, and that's an old technique from like the 1700s, basically, where you make a prototype and you make a plaster mold and you pour liquid clay called slip into this mold, and you're able to cast out of the slip. So slip casting is how that name comes about. But Wedgwood Pottery in England, they're known for doing that. So it's an old technique that isn't usually used today. So I learned that technique while I was studying at the university, but I didn't really develop the forms I'm using now and my floral designs until I kind of was able to take my own study upon myself, because I love research. So when I graduated, I didn't stop studying. It just allowed me to get even more specific on the things I really, really cared about, and kind of let the other things fall to the side. So that's where my surface design comes in. And like you mentioned, I have wildflower designs I use. I have 4 different wildflower designs of flowers I've just grown up with in the Carolinas. And I've hand-drawn them, and then I actually screen print them onto my pieces. So I'm able to get the same exact drawings, the same sizing and everything, to kind of make those complete sets that you see, like for dinnerware sets and things like that.
So when you say screen printing, what exactly is that process? How does that work?
So basically, I have my design and I got that copyrighted, and then I sent it off to a company who makes silk screens. And it's the same idea if you've ever seen people screen printing like t-shirts, where the screen has some areas that allow pigment to come through and some areas that don't. So when I run the pigment through the screen, it comes out with that flower pattern. So I print those onto newsprint paper, and then I apply those as transfers, similar to a temporary tattoo, if you remember those as a kid, where you put it on and put water on the back and peel it off and the design's transferred. It's that exact same idea. I just do that onto my pottery, which is a lot of freedom for me, because I can cut the designs however I want. I can overlay them, and I can change them up to get what I need depending on the piece I'm working with.
I kind of have it on, I'd say it's probably from reading your book, but I have it on my goals to try. I've never tried pottery in my life, and I've always wanted, I've been saying it for years, I want to try it, so I'm definitely going to try to find some place that can do it. So with the clay, because, I mean, all I know is the stuff that I'm kind of, like, I've read the book, but, like, is there different types of clay? Because, I mean, there's people listening as well, that, like, when you're actually making these.
Of course, I usually use porcelain, so that's a really white clay. It's really soft. It doesn't have what they call grog or grit, and basically that just means it is very, very fine clay particles. So I'm able to get kind of translucency, and if you're familiar with porcelain, you'll see it's kind of translucent when you hold it up to the light. But that also means that porcelain is not really great for thermal shock. So I can't really make bakeware out of porcelain. I couldn't make like a big casserole dish, because if I put that cold pottery casserole dish straight into the oven, it doesn't take that thermal shock and it'll crack. So there's different clays that are used for different things. So if you wanted to make bakeware, you would use something called stoneware, and it does have that grog in it, those gritty parts that really hold the clay together, and that allows that clay to take the thermal shock. But it isn't translucent. Usually it's a brownish kind of clay or a reddish clay. And so there's all these beautiful different clays that allow you to do so many different things. And you can even dig clay straight out of the ground. And the most common form of that is earthenware clay. So it fires at a lower temperature, but it is probably most common in, you've seen it as like terracotta flower pots or different things. It's kind of that really, really red clay. And that's the clay we have actually in the Carolinas here. So I did dig up some clay and process it, and that is a whole new level. Usually I just buy my clay processed, but you can dig your own clay, and there's so many different types of clays that allow you to do so many different things.
And like, it's just water then that you're adding when you're actually making the thing, yeah? And like, is it that just experience as you go along and you kind of, or is it that you just keep adding it till you get the right feel?
To process your own clay, basically you want to dig up the clay from the ground, and it'll have rocks and, tree roots or whatever in there that you don't want in your clay. So you'll add water to it, and then you put like a paint mixer attachment to a drill, and you really drill up that clay, essentially. It's called blunging. And you're trying to just really separate all of those clay particles to allow them to absorb as much water as you can. And then you sift the clay. So you're trying to put the clay through a sieve and get all of those grimy bits, the rocks and the plant bits out of the clay. And so at that point, you should be left with a relatively pure type of clay. It's just way too wet. And that's when you start drying it out. And for me, that means I put the clay into a pillowcase and kind of suspend it over a bucket so water can drip out of the pillowcase into the bucket. And then I'm able to kind of work with the clay after that. So it's a very tedious process, and that red clay does stain pretty much everything, your hands, your clothes. And when I'm used to working with white porcelain, I had to get all new tools for that. But it was a huge learning experience for me to be able to do that.
And like with your hands then, because obviously people don't wear gloves and things like that. Can it damage it? Do you have to use special creams afterwards to kind of protect your hand, or is it actually good for your skin?
Well, they do make clay masks. A lot of women use that kind of thing. But it does dry out your hands a little bit. The biggest concern, though, is silicosis, which is breathing in the silica that's naturally in the clay. If you breathe in that dust, you can actually develop silicosis in your lungs, which is kind of like a type of cancer. So I always wear a dust mask, when I'm working with really dusty clay. But the goal is to keep the clay as wet as possible, so you don't have to deal with silicosis as much. But of course, there's always things like glazes, for instance, when you're mixing up glazes from dry powders. Some of them can cause cancer, or they have different ingredients that you don't want to breathe them in. So there's always different precautions you have to take around the ceramic studio. Because, pretty much any ingredient can kill you in some way or another. So you've just got to make sure you're handling it in the appropriate way, and you'll be fine.
No, because I had seen a lot of the pictures with the masks, and I thought it was the craziness in the last few years, but that was the reason. So, okay, that's good. So I saw as well that there was like tools that, as it's spinning, I mean, it's just from a still picture on the thing, but that you kind of keep it in place and you kind of trim it. So you might just kind of let people know about that, what that's.
Of course. So usually in media, when you see pottery, you see someone throwing it on the wheel. But after you throw the piece on the wheel, you actually let it set to the side and kind of firm up. You let it dry out a little bit. And then all of the things that you weren't able to do on the first go around when you were throwing the piece, you come back and trim it. So if you have a piece of pottery and you notice it has a foot, a lot of pottery has body parts to be able to understand. So if you're looking at the base of the piece, and it has kind of that raised ring around it, then that is the foot of the piece. And you get that by trimming the pieces later. So I have different tools for that. I actually turn the piece upside down. I put it back on the wheel. I have to recenter that piece on the wheel. And then I take metal tools that kind of have like metal loops on them. They're called ribbon tools. But essentially, they're really carving away the clay, very similar to a woodworker with a lathe. I'm taking that excess clay off of the piece to create a finer silhouette and get more definition in my pieces, and just kind of give it a little bit more style on the bottom. I can take some of that heaviness off of the clay by removing the excess clay I don't need. So there's so many other steps than just essentially throwing the piece on the wheel to get to that finished piece.
And like, I believe the furnace is a kiln or something like K-I-L-N, yeah. And must you leave it dry first and then put it into that, or what's the kind of process for it?
Basically, the piece will be fired twice. So you let it dry completely, and then you put it in the kiln for the bisque firing. And that allows the piece to go through that chemical change for the first time. And in the US, I fire to 1,945 degrees Fahrenheit for the first firing. And that really just firms up the piece, and it allows me to put the glaze on it. So that at that stage, the piece is still porous, and I can still apply that glaze. If I fired it all the way up to the hottest temperature it can go to, it kind of seals the piece, so I can't really add that glaze component. So I just fire it enough that it won't break or be brittle, and I can add that wet glaze, and then I fire it again, and at that point I'm firing to 2,262 degrees Fahrenheit to get that finished look. But you're right, if you put that wet piece straight from the wheel into the kiln, the moisture in the clay does have a very high potential to explode. And I have been impatient, or I've thought things have been more dry, and things do explode. That is not a myth. And it can cause other pieces to be damaged in the process, because this explosive clay is just blowing up in the kiln, and it could hit other pieces and damage them along the way.
You said the brisk firing. So, like, is there electric type kilns, or are they all just fire type? And like, how do you know to get the temperature?
Sure, there's electric kilns, and there's multiple different types. So you're right, there's like a wood fire type kiln, there's a gas firing type kiln. I usually use electric kilns just because that's what I'm able to have access to, and they also provide some brighter colors that I'm trying to get when I use my blues, and I want to keep my white clay as white as possible. So I use electric firings. That's called oxidation, because oxygen is constantly flowing through the kiln to brighten up those glazes. But it gets to temperature several different ways depending on your kiln. If you don't have an electric kiln, then you use something called cones. And basically these are little pieces that are in the shape of like a triangle cone. And you put the pointy end up on the shelf, and then there's a peephole in the kiln, so you can remove that peephole during the firing. You'll wear some special protective glasses, and you can look in at those cones and see if the pointy end has started to melt and bend toward the shelf. And depending on what you're firing to, you can get different cones at different melting points. And then that's kind of how you're seeing, that's, as they say, the old school way of knowing how your kiln is firing, based on the melting points of those cones. But with electric firings, they have a computer in them, and I can really just program it to what I need it to go to and trust that it will. Every once in a while, if I think my kiln is off firing, I will put cones into my kiln and just check it to make sure everything is firing correctly, because there are hot spots and cool spots in your kiln. And so my electric kiln runs very similar to a toaster. It has coils called elements that heat up and turn red. So if those elements aren't working appropriately, then my kiln might underfire or overfire, which could cause all different issues. If it underfires, then it's probably not going to be as food safe or watertight. And if it overfires, my clay actually has the potential to just melt completely. So it's a very fine line of making sure everything is running smoothly to be able to get the exact product you want.
And I've just seen some of the pictures as well. I think maybe they're on the Facebook page or the book, but that you can have a load of them and you can have different layers. So, like, it must be very hard. It must be just through pain that you're kind of realizing underfiring or overfiring when you have a lot of stuff on the thing. And that's obviously to be more productive than kind of doing kind of once-off things.
Exactly. When I first got my kiln, I actually got it. It was used, and the person who had it before me didn't really understand how to make it work again. And kilns are very similar to cars, where you can pretty much just take out whatever you want and replace it and create a whole new kiln. And so that's what I did. I kept the skeleton, so to speak, but I gutted out all of the electric parts and replaced everything that needed to be replaced. So I thought this was going to be a successful firing. And like you said, I stacked up layers because you want to fire as efficiently as possible. And the kilns fire the best when they're full, because if there's too much airflow, the kilns aren't going to meet the temperature they need to. They're going to work a lot harder than if they have pottery completely full in them and the pottery's helping keep the kiln hot. So I had filled up the kiln and one of my shelves actually broke. And so it broke onto the shelf below it. So I had lost all of the pieces on the shelf that broke and all of the pieces on the shelf below it that it broke onto. So like you said, it's a constant risk when you're working with temperatures that high. And of course, when the kiln's firing, I'm not able to do anything about it. So the kiln could fire for up to 14 hours and you're just not allowed to touch it. Usually my firings are closer to 6 to 8 hours, but still, then it has to cool down for about 24 hours. So you're constantly waiting, wondering what's going to happen. And then when you open up that kiln, sometimes it's a great surprise and sometimes it's heartbreak and you just never know what you're going to get.
And with the price range, then how much are they to the kilns?
Kilns themselves, if you're getting a new kiln, they can be pretty pricey. Usually a new kiln starts at about like $1,000 is probably the cheapest I've ever seen a new kiln, and prices have been rising. But on average, kilns are usually around $2,000 or $3,000, but you can get some really nice kilns for up to $5,000 or more. So it just kind of depends. But when I found that used kiln for free, I thought, what a great deal. And I still had to put a lot of money into the parts to replace it. But, you know, it's a fine line of working with when you're running a business, of course, is, you know, like what can I skimp on and what do I need to buy new? And so it's all those kind of things you have to take into consideration.
And with the kind of craziness in the last few years, electricity all over the world has gone through the roof. Like your costs must have kind of doubled, if not more, the last few years, have they, with the price of electricity?
Yeah, it's not so much electricity. It really only cost me like less than $10 electric wise to fire my kiln. But everything else in the pottery world went up because, like you mentioned, with COVID, everyone wanted to try pottery because they were stuck at home. So why not? Which is great for the pottery community because that adds interest. It means more people are buying supplies, so those companies can stay in business and produce more equipment and all these new things. But it also meant that the supply chain was running like 50 weeks out for a new kiln and just ridiculous time frames for all of these things. But then also during like mining particles for clays, there's different things. So for instance, some clays use something called Cornwall stone that's literally dug from Cornwall, England. So there are different parts of clay recipes that if the mines shut down, then you're not going to get that ingredient. And so we recently had that happen with something called talc. And it's the idea of talcum powder, baby powder that now is recognized as being not good for you. But that talc mine shut down because of the whole talcum powder crisis. But since that was used in clay, now we're finding substitutes. And so now clay prices have over doubled. And all these little glaze prices have risen. And so now I'm making my own glaze because it's cheaper than buying it. So there's all these different elements that you don't think about. A global pandemic, surely that can't affect pottery, but so many different things. So it's amazing how the web of this world works. So many different things are attached to other things and supply chain issues and whatever it might be. Yeah, a lot of pottery costs have risen recently, especially clay and glaze, which everyone needs to buy if you're making pottery. So yeah, costs have gone up in the past couple of years.
So like when you're putting the stencils or, you know, the paintings on it, that's glaze as such. You kind of put is like a film over it to protect it, make it kind of waterproof and stuff, or like how does the glazing work?
So after I put my transfers, that's called an underglaze. And basically that's just pigment mixed with clay. So I'm able to get those designs on there. Then after that, I dip the whole piece in a bucket of clear glaze. And that, like you said, that seals it. It makes it waterproof. It makes it food safe. And it is just pretty much like a clear glass, essentially, that's going over the whole piece to kind of cover it. But they make glazes in all different colors and types. So you could see different types of glazes. Some have like crystals that burst and make different patterns. But for me, I just want the clear glaze so I can highlight my flower patterns. But that's a lot of responsibility that potters have is if you're selling something, you have the responsibility to make sure it's food safe, to make sure that you're not going to sell someone something that could have lead in it or could cause health conditions later on. You want to make sure that there's no leaching. So for instance, some glazes might look like they're watertight, but after you've had a cup of water for a couple hours, maybe it's left a ring on your table, and that means that the glaze wasn't watertight. And so that could be an issue with the glaze, or it could be an issue with the clay not bonding with the glaze. So there's all these testing. When I switched over to making my own clear glaze, I had to do all this testing to make sure the acidity of food wouldn't erode my glaze and that my glaze was going to be food safe and it is actually watertight, so I can sell something to my customers with full faith and responsibility, knowing that they are going to be safe while they're using my pottery.
And I think it was you have a video on Facebook, and you were doing the shells that you were creating both sides and putting them together. And the main thing you were saying is to get the air out. But I saw like some of your mugs and stuff, it's like shells and different things on it, which they look fantastic, to be honest. But then I heard that it's like dishwasher safe, and I don't know, did you say microwave as well? And I was like, I'd be afraid to put that into a dishwasher. But it's amazing that actually that you're able to do that. That's that you can make them that they're dishwasher safe.
Yeah, and that really just depends on how I'm formulating my glazes and how the process that I'm firing works. So there's some firing processes that are only for decoration. For instance, like pit firings or raku firings, where you get like these really beautiful colors, but they don't have that sheen to them to make them watertight. So there's all different aspects of that to make it technical enough that it does actually hold water. And and once it's food safe, it's microwave and dishwasher safe too. And that's the beauty of pottery as well. We've got examples of pottery from thousands of years ago from our earliest ancestors that has survived. And once that pottery goes through that chemical change in the kiln, it can never go back to just being clay in the ground. It has gone through that firing process that those chemicals have completely changed. They've bonded to one another, and they are that unit, so to speak. So in theory, these pieces could last for hundreds of years.
And you've got a lot of awards for your work, so you might let us know a bit about that.
Yes, I've had the honor of having 3 different solo exhibitions at this point, and those have just been so much fun to be able to go into a gallery space and completely transform it with my work and to show off my favorite pieces the best that I can make and really create this whole world in that gallery setting of my pieces. So I've done a couple of those. I've also been able to do residencies in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, which is it's about 2 hours north of me in this beautiful vacation mountain town. So I'm able to go in for a week and put my pottery in this old cottage that was, it used to be a painter's house in the 1800s. And they've preserved it and turned it into an art space. So I do that. The past 2 summers, I'll go in and show my work there. I went to the 701 Center for Contemporary Arts. That was a competition in 2020 involving artists of South Carolina. I was living in South Carolina at the time. And I was the youngest to make it as far as I did. I made it to the top 3. So I was able to show my work in the capital of South Carolina. And that was really amazing to be in that city and show off my work. And I've just been able to do so many different things. Recently, I've been shipping off my work to different national calls within the U.S. So I'm shipping my pottery off to states that I've actually never been to. So like Louisiana has shown my work, Texas. I sent some things to Missouri recently. So that's been really fun to be able to kind of mark off on my little map, like where my pottery has actually ended up. And it's been really amazing to ship pieces, to know that people in California will be enjoying my work, in Pennsylvania, and all these different amazing places that maybe I've never been to them, but my pottery is, so it's kind of cool that way.
Very good. And I like it because I saw you've got a few different kind of shops, places where your stuff is for sale as well. And I saw like the incense holder. I think it was like $15. I was like, the amount of work that you have to do. I mean, we've talked. I'm like, you can't be making anything on that. Like, I mean, because it's colored and everything. This, when it's handmade, that's a strange one. Like, and I suppose with even the mugs and everything, there's a high cost in the labor element to it and preparation and everything. And if you take all the time into account, I don't think it's as lucrative for people, to kind of go, I'm going to make this business. I think it's a difficult business to kind of get into. And like, I mean, I heard you talking to some other show about just the social media, because like, I don't think anybody likes social media. We're on it because we think, we need to be. And the reality is most people now, I mean, like before you get a lot of views and stuff like that, and now all they do is just keep giving you sponsorship, and most people don't see it. Your friends don't see you posting something or putting a picture up, which is strange, because the reality is people are connecting with you because they want to see your work, and they see all other stuff that's been bombarded to them. So that must be difficult as well, just the kind of marketing side for your business.
Yes, the marketing can be exhausting. And when I moved to Asheville, I kind of scouted out different areas, because Asheville, North Carolina is really big for the arts. So I was looking at all of these festivals that were in my area and what I could do. And so the following show season, which is pretty much fall to December to Christmas, I did about 9 shows over that season, doing one a weekend. And that's really exhausting because it's just me running my business. So loading pieces up into my car, driving, spending a full day selling pieces, and then unloading my car and doing it all again the next weekend. So after that, I kind of cut back on shows. And so I'm trying to do more wholesale and online. But I have talked in other podcasts about pottery is so personal. Like I mentioned with my first connection to it, having that experience of touching the clay. It's such a personal experience. And if you're buying a mug, you want to hold it in your hand. You want to feel how the handle sits. You want to know how that cup is going to feel as you're drinking out of it. And you can't do that online. So online sales for pottery are pretty challenging in that way, just because people want that connection. So that's now my new venture, is getting into different galleries in the South to be able to have my work available full time in different areas where people can come in and look at it, have that personal feel, and purchase it that way. So I've just been restocking the shops I'm in, which has been really nice. And Christmas is always a great season to sell pottery too. So now that we're kind of in the beginning of the new year, things slow down and I'm able to kind of regroup, decide what I want to continue making, what I want to try new. And so I'll start getting ready for upcoming shows in the summer and fall, because I still do some festivals. I really do like that community of being outside all day and seeing your other friends who do festivals that you really only see at festivals. So it is a great community, but not to do 9 shows in a season. I learned that's way too many. So I'll do like 4 or 5. But yeah, selling pottery, especially with the economy today, it's challenging. When people were getting stimulus checks, honestly, pottery sales were really great. And now everyone, you never know what's going to happen. So we'll see what happens this year. But yeah, that's the important thing for me, is making work that I enjoy making and that I find beautiful. And it makes the process so much more fun than if I was making work just so I could sell it to make money off of it. To me, that takes the joy out of it. And trends change so quickly that I wouldn't really have a stable business. I'd constantly be rebranding and reformatting and changing a logo or whatever that might be. So I just stay consistent in making what I like, and hopefully I'll find the right customers along the way. And I love it when I meet some returning customers who say, "Oh, I have a couple of your mugs. I have to get another one to complete the set," or seeing them follow me on social media and show up at the festivals. It's amazing to just kind of create that lifelong bond and know that they're enjoying my pottery as much as I am, which is really special.
And just with your grandmother, who kind of got you started with the thing, is she still alive? Did she get to see your work?
She is still alive. Yes, she actually came to a book signing last weekend. And of course, she told all of her friends. But yes, she is such a proud supporter, and I'm so glad to have her still with me. But yeah, she has pretty much one of everything, one of every flower design. She's constantly supporting me and loving my work in that way, which is just so special to me to continue to have that bond with her.
And like with the book then, because I mean, I think that's it's going to be a fantastic marketing thing for you, because the reality is when people see this, they'll see your work and they'll kind of understand it 10 times better, and kind of like they want to connect with you and everything. So like, why did the book come about? Why did you decide I want to be an author?
Basically, I was about to graduate in 2019, and I was losing all of that art community that I had. And you know, when you graduate from college and get out into the real world, it's challenging because there are people who don't think like you and people who don't understand the art world. And I was really looking for a devotional book that I could read about pottery, because there's so many different references of pottery in the Bible. And at that point, I couldn't find what I was looking for. So I'm a Christian, and I just felt the Holy Spirit telling me to start writing down these references. And so at the time, I tried to get it published in 2019, and it was a completely different book. And I'm so glad that I was rejected. At the time, I was not glad I was rejected, but now I'm glad, because I just felt like the Holy Spirit was telling me that I didn't have enough experience. And so between 2019 and January of 2023, when I rewrote the manuscript, during that time, I worked for a ceramics supply distributor as customer service, kind of help desk, answering technical questions, learning so much that way. I was restocking the warehouse full of different supplies that I didn't even know existed in the pottery world. And I was teaching private lessons. And of course, when you're a teacher, you learn just as much as the student. So I was learning and getting experience in that way. And then I ended up moving to Asheville during the pandemic to work for a potter as a studio assistant. And I did that for about a year and a half, learning all of the aspects of running your own pottery business, and how do you make a nice website, and how do you set out your pottery that is appealing for these shows, and all these different things. So then January of 2023, I had more free time on my hands than I thought. And I revisited the manuscript and pretty much rewrote the whole thing in about 2.5 weeks. And that's when I started reaching out to publishers. And I was just praying, like, Lord, I tried to get this published my own way the first time, and it did not happen. So if it's going to go anywhere this time, it's going to be from you. And one publisher reached out to me, and it was Morgan James Publishing in New York. And they said, okay, we'll take a chance on it. But to be able to even submit it for review, you need to lengthen the word count by 1/3. So I spent about a week and a half doubling the word count. And I sent it back as an application. And then a couple of months later, I got that acceptance letter. And as they say, the rest is history. It's just been a crazy ride of getting my photos in the book and getting my flower drawings and promoting the book and trying to make it as unique to me as possible, and now getting it out there into the world.
I heard you on another show, but prior to that, I thought it was self-published with the name Morgan, because
Right.
Morgan Publishing. I was like, so that's interesting as well, because I mean that's rare for something like that with the name.
Mm-hmm. I know, it was crazy. And several people have thought I've self-published, and I'm like, I don't know near enough to self-publish a book. You think I'm a lot more capable than I am. But no, it's amazing that that name worked out like that. It's just a God thing, I think. But it was pretty crazy. And I'm so thankful that they took a chance on little old me. It's not like I have success publishing books before. This is my first book. So I'm just so thankful to get to experience all of this.
I mean, like you're doing, you're going on a lot of shows and everything, getting the message out, which in turn will help, which there might be more books. But like, I'm assuming there's like the Kindle version, but what about the audio? Is there an audio planned, and will it be your voice?
That is a common question, and I need to follow up with my publisher. I'm not sure on that. I would love to do an audiobook. I think that would be really fun. But it is digital and physical right now. So who knows? Maybe it'll be audio too.
Yeah, no, just make sure it's your own voice. You have a good voice, so I think the passion will come through as well. So I think it will help. So listen, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I recommend people, to get the book, that they'll understand a lot about it, and you kind of give reference as well to stories for everything that you're talking on it. I don't want to go into that because I don't want to ruin the book for anybody, but it's a good read. So you might let people know how they can get in contact with you.
Of course, probably the easiest place is to just go to my website. It's www.morganmccarver.com. And from there, you can pretty much do anything. You can shop the book, you can shop my pottery, you can see pictures of things I've made, you can sign up for my newsletter, follow me on social media, get in contact with me. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll put the link. But I'll also put all the Facebook and everything, and I give the one with the video because I think it's very good. There's like a 13-minute one. And I'll make sure I put it in the audio and the video. Thank you very much, Morgan.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. Until next week. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you can find my 6 podcasts on roycolin.com or scan the QR code if you're looking to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, help with that. Also, if you're looking for a virtual assistant, we also have that service. And you can help the show by visiting the store, supporting our sponsors, or making a donation. Until next week, take care.